Great. Thank you, Jason. And hello, everybody joining the event today. It's great to be here. Again, Isaac Sacolick or NY Ike on Twitter. And today I'm going to be talking to you about digital leadership that's going out over the next few years. Part of my vantage point is having been both a CTO in startups, a CIO in organizations that we're transforming well beyond, well earlier than digital transformation became a buzzword. I started writing about it over 10 years ago. My blog, blogs.starcio.com, is rated a #1 blog for CIOs. I then went on to write Driving Digital, which I'll talk a little bit about during the talk today. And then love speaking to everybody. So very excited to tell you about where I'm seeing the role of IT, the role of innovation, the role of just getting things done in a world where technology is becoming even more important, and a world where things have become a lot more crazier and harder to predict. Before I get started, I do want to share with you my thoughts. Jason knows this. I'm a huge fan of Canada and a huge fan of visiting Canada. I kind of miss getting on a plane like many of you do. What you're seeing here is just some of the photos that I collected last year, visiting Toronto and Montreal and Calgary and Banff, mostly for speaking events, some of them for Sync. And it's always just been a great journey working with CIOs and other IT leaders that I know in Canada. My book, Driving Digital, a couple years ago became a bestseller out in Canada. And so every time I speak to a Canadian audience, I always thank and say, thank you for your support and your interest in the things that I write and speak about. But today, I'm here really to talk to you about the future. And as I was thinking about writing this talk, Driving Digital 2025, I said, I made some predictions going back to 2016. That's roughly when I started writing my first book. It published in 2017. And I had notions that what I was writing about was going to be important to CIOs and CTOs, heads of operations, heads of analytics and data science, application developers, infrastructure, cloud managers, and security managers. And so I put this book together to really as a guidebook for people who are leading their organizations through transformation. So I said, I wonder if I could take what I was learning and what I was observing around 2020 and really start focusing on what digital leadership is going to look like over the next few years. So let's look back first from 2016 to 2020. And then I can look a little forward with you through the rest of this keynote around what I think is important over the next 5 years. So 2016 was a really good year for me. I came out with the book Driving Digital, and I'll show you what's in this book. I also started my company StarCIO, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go on. But 2016 also was the year that I started my relationship with Sync. It was the first time I keynoted at one of their events over down in Houston, Texas. We've been partners for a few years now, and I just want to thank the Sync team for 4 years of a great partnership. Like many other businesses over the last year, we've all had to pivot how we work with our customers and stakeholders and how we run our businesses. And Sync being an events company going all digital over the last 6 months, I just want to thank them for making this opportunity available to all of us. When I wrote the book in 2016, I came up with this phrase and this concept around a digital lens. And it was because I was always sitting at the table with my executives, feeling the impact of technology, new competition from areas that we were unexpected from. Some of them were startups. Some of them were people coming into our industry from other industries. We were seeing the impact of data and analytics and where people were making really great strides. And certainly customer experience was changing dramatically. And so we all looked at the problem at hand. How do we reinvent our business for a digital age from a different vantage point? And I always used to say, I was looking at it from a digital lens starting out with customer experience, then thinking about what the impact of new competitors were doing, what startups were doing in our space, what the impact of regulations were doing in our space. I was always thinking about where new technologies could provide an impact, and very specifically thinking about where those technologies were accessible for companies of my size and my skill and capabilities. There's a lot of technologies out there, and all of us are trying to figure out how to use the skills that we have and build partnerships and build new capabilities up. And so we have to pick the types of technologies that we can really succeed at. And so that was the lens that I was looking at transformation and trying to understand by which to actually go about and getting my organization to do things differently. This led to a number of practices that I recognized in 2016. It became the cornerstone of my book, and really about capabilities that I feel CIOs really need to continue to mature as they become digital organizations. And just reading off from the top and down to the right, customer experience and really aligning what you're selling and how you're marketing your brand and your expectations of what you can do with customers is really the top of the food chain. Then looking to the right about how you think about IT investments, where you are making some big bets, where you're investing in innovation, where you're taking cost out of your legacy systems is really the heart of an agile portfolio management practice. Then really executing to big visions, but biting them off in small iterative chunks and experiments that you can measure feedback on, and then aligning both the application and delivery side of IT with the operations side. That's really the heart of Agile and DevSecOps processes. As I go around to the left, I don't know of a single organization that isn't trying to leverage data and analytics to strategic advantage, and also experiment with some of the emerging technologies. Some will pick 1, 2, or 3 between IoT and blockchain and machine learning and artificial intelligence, but increasingly other technologies are becoming important. Things like AR and VR and different ways that we're collaborating now that many of us are working remotely. And then finally, I really do think about how do we empower the workforce to do more with technology. I don't know a single organization that feels like they have all the skills and capabilities in-house in their IT group. There are millennials and other smart folks in our business groups that with the right technologies and the right governance can be empowered to do a lot more with technology. So that's been the basis of what digital transformation and driving digital has been all about the last 4 years. And I've been doing this with a number of organizations that have looking to improve their digital capabilities. I also look back at some of the stories in 2016 that influenced me in my writing back then and my practices that I put together. And what you can see here is that there are some themes that repeat today. A police shooting, a virus that's breaking out, a DOS attack that really took down, was a huge cybersecurity event, the importance of mobile and putting maybe technologies out to market a little too fast and creating a safety problem. Integrations between technology companies and social media companies. And then very interesting, this no-touch thermometer device that came out back in 2016. So what that says to me is when we look at where we are today, the things that we're working on today, the things that are important, will continue becoming important and part of our roadmaps as we think about the future. But it's very hard today to fully expect and understand which of the things we're working on are really going to have impact in 4 to 5 years. And in fact, when I look at 2016 and say which of the stories really stood out, here are the 2 that really come to mind. First and foremost, how tech world's immaturity handled the Trump election. This is really about social media and social networking and artificial intelligence. Just, I remember back when I was the CIO at Business Week, and we really struggled with user-generated content and comments, and how do we moderate them to make sure the right messages were getting through without stymieing free speech. And so, we're at it today, 4 years later, and we're still struggling how to use AI and machine learning to prevent fake news, but also to be used for good, for things like finding safety issues and finding ways to make sure that the public is operating in a safe way. So very interesting, this story back in 2016. And then looking also on sort of the emerging technology side, what Tesla was trying to do in self-driving capabilities 4 years ago is slowly really going from science fiction to a real reality. And we're starting to think about entire industries that are going to be built off of autonomous vehicles and smart buildings and even smart cities. So there is no doubt that the things that we're talking about doing and the things that we're experiencing today are going to be things that have long-lasting impact. One of those things, obviously, for 2020 is going to be looking at digital transformation through the lens of COVID-19. And obviously, we're still in the early stages of this. We're not out of what life is going to be like when we come out after a vaccine and we can start thinking about what a truly new normal is. Clearly 2021 is going to be a hybrid year of many people working remotely with ups and downs in terms of people getting sick and what the impacts are. Lots of unrest and unpredictable impacts to our governments. And so a lot of what I've talked to CIOs about, particularly since July, right? When we look at March and April, many CIOs were just responding to, being able to work remotely and the safety issues that we were all contemplating. When we looked at May, June, and into July, I think many of us were hoping that things would return back to normal pretty quickly. And then when we started talking again, July, August, September, October, it's been, how do we continue to provide remote working for our employees, provide a safe environment, ensure people are collaborating well in this mixed hybrid world? And then how do we start getting back to business? There's plenty of businesses that have been severely disrupted through COVID that are continually being disrupted because of digital. And we need to get back to business and being able to turn our business around and actually use technology to an advantage. So this is the only story I have in my backdrop as I think about what we have to prepare, particularly next year and into the upcoming years, and how do we think about what Digital Leadership 2025 looks like. So the first thing I want to share with you about what to prepare for starts with the C-suite itself. This is probably what your picture looked like, hopefully smiling and collaborating with your colleagues 7-8 months ago in boardrooms and thinking through what the next phase of your digital transformation was going to look like and how to change your business. And we've been doing this with all new folks sitting at the table. We're not just technologists at the table. We're in customer experience, we're in marketing, we have chief data and analytics officers that are working with us. We have CMOs who have to think about how to bring in new audiences to our and new prospects to the work that we do. We have CFOs who have to think about the changes in how we're financing things. And the question is, how are you looking to collaborate with this group going forward? Now, we're all used to this picture where we have everybody looking at us and expecting us to do more with less, and the ability to listen to things and get ahead of what people are looking for us to accomplish. In fact, the way I usually look at the CIO and an IT leader's role is by putting all these questions together. Who are we serving? What are we trying to accomplish for them? Why is it important for our customers and their value proposition? How are we executing, and where are we taking our priorities first? What parts of the world, what parts globally, which customers we want to work with first. And this is a very big part of the CIO's role in thinking through digital transformation and prioritization. But it's not easy. Okay, and it was never easy pre-COVID. And the first thing that I think about going into a post-COVID world is how are we really going to collaborate on some of the bigger decisions that we used to be able to get in a room and do an offsite and really plan together for hours, and much more difficult to do today when our executives aren't together all the time and can't have a water cooler conversation and can't really look each other in the eye and shake hands to make sure we're all on the same page about what our priorities are. So very important for the CIO's role is really about building those relationships up on a one-by-one basis, on a one-by-two basis, and really understand what the pain points are and what to focus on when moving programs forward. Second thing is, and I wrote about this early back in March and April about what are some of the new threats, but also some of the new opportunities, and to put that digital lens back on and think through what's impacting things in your industry. We'll talk a little bit about this now, but if you thought about doing a digital strategy in 2019 about what banking customers or what insurance customers were looking for in 2020 and 21, you probably had to take that book, write version 1.0 on it, and come up with an entire new playbook given what's happening in COVID. All right, and so that's creating some new threats and opportunities for CIOs to go after, and really thinking through with your executive board what the new priorities are becomes important. Lastly, like I said, I don't know of a single organization that isn't thinking about how to really win with data and analytics and machine learning. And so I think the challenge now going forward is to take things that were pilots and early experiments and realizing that those are no longer good enough. We need to really think through how to use data and analytics to change our business, how we're listening to customers, how we're making our operations more efficient, how to think about where we're dialing down priorities because they're really not important. And data really is the equalizer for businesses that need to understand how to prioritize and how to collaborate better. All right, so thinking through 2025, start with how you're working with your executive leadership. Now, I'm going to share with you several others now that really talk about tech leadership specifically during this new normal. And it really starts with this idea of active listening. You can see two soccer players here. One's on offense, one on defense. And what always amazed me about soccer is that you always have to be on your toes, ready to either stop the player with the ball or ideally steal the ball and go on to an offensive action. I think that's really the stance that IT leaders need to have today. We really don't know when the next risk is going to materialize, and we have to move in a different direction than we're anticipating. We're also looking for evidence of places where we can create strategic advantages, sometimes in small areas and sometimes in global areas. When some of you have global footprints and people working at different speeds with different issues facing them, it's really coming down to how do you listen to customers and to employees and finding new ways to drive at those opportunities. We're clearly working at a time where there's different patterns in which people are working that is creating new areas of where we have to think about collaborating and also potentially new threats. And so, things that I think about around this are how do we listen to what's working with our employees? Jason, I'm getting some noise on the line. I don't know if that's coming from you. But how do we listen to our employees in terms of not just the tools that are required to enable employees to collaborate, but how are they using them? What are the best practices around them? How are we making sure that they're using them securely, right? So some of the new threats and new opportunities around usage patterns. This particular graph, it really comes from the World Economic Forum, looking at what are some of the most worrisome areas that folks are having around this new normal. And you could see cyber attacks, a prolonged recession are on top of them. And so, CIOs and IT leaders really need to take this to bear, because it means to me, you're really picking your battles around what areas to go invest in, how to think about that you might have a surge uh, a surge in funding to go after things that are critically important. You might also face some budget shortfalls in other areas. So I think you have to pick your battles, and then really turning on your listening skills to see if new threats are materializing. Okay. This particular paper, and you could see the link below for it, actually provides a couple of really good a 5-point set of examples of how to effectively lead during this. And they suggest 2 things: focusing on protecting the critical capabilities and also balancing risk-informed decisions around your crises. So it's very easy to go into a complete defensive posture, but what we're really looking for organizations is to think about how to balance both defense and offense. A big part of organizations, again, is around analytics. And for me, that's not just about dashboards and about becoming smart. It's really about becoming the real-time enterprise. This intersection of IoT, 5G, and machine learning. We're seeing new edge computing capabilities improve. We're seeing new ways that public clouds are making their technologies available in private clouds. And we're seeing a lot in private cloud infrastructure starting to have public cloud capabilities. And so what we're really looking to do today is reaffirm where we're going to make investments around making our organizations smart with analytics and data that's being processed in real time, but also improving the performance and scalability of our applications so that we can actually respond to real-time feedback. So if I were to pick one area that all organizations have to think about, is moving from this world of batch where we process daily dumps of data or daily processing of data, where a week-old data was good enough to do financial decisions on, to one where we increasingly need to be more real-time in what we're processing. Then several examples of customer needs that are evolving. Obviously, this is happening in retail when we think about safety, but also thinking about in other industries. You look at 300 senior insurance executives talking about changes in customer behavior, 86%, and 90% saying that digital transformation is going to accelerate. And some of the areas where even in insurance, where digital is going to have an entire new way of working with customers, from self-driving cars to emergency support to home security, all kinds of different ways for insurance companies to really work with consumers and businesses differently with digital mindsets and products. Even in financial institutions, thinking through that your main touch point with a consumer bank was at a branch, and now you have to think about how do you actually help your customers when they need to take loans out? How do you help your small businesses at this time when things are challenging? And you could see 88% of financial institutions look at customer experience, and another 76% look at analytics as the most important areas of their transformation exercises. All right, when I think about Agile as a way and a vehicle of not only planning and delivering capabilities around innovation, around bringing new applications and data capabilities to bear, I'm not just talking about Scrum and teams doing stand-ups. I'm talking about a continuum of being able to plan not only your next sprint, but actually into the future, to do your releases, to have estimating practices in place so that your Agile teams are practicing with your product and your product management functions so that you can actually see what the roadmaps are. Having releases that are reliable, so that are secure, that are scalable, that are functioning well, and then being able to listen for feedback from systems and from your customers and stakeholders to make sure that your roadmap is successful. So a big part of what I think organizations really need to do is shift from just Agile processes to Agile collaborations and cultures. And then finally, when I think about DevOps, which is really the alignment of development and operating groups, and really focusing on not just getting the speed and the reliability from that, but how do you shift left security and how do you improve quality assurance so that what you're releasing is reliable. These practices are becoming more complicated and there's more technologies being added every year in terms of automation and intelligence. And so a lot of what I advise IT leaders to do is also consider where you're developing partnerships, right? This is not a place that every organization can excel at, doing Kubernetes or implementing AI ops or having really robust CI/CD pipelines even. And so when you think about what your future is from your technology capabilities around DevOps, look for partnerships. So I'm going to share with you now 5 things that I think you need to focus on as you go through your next 5 years. And it really starts with a full assessment of where your organization is at. I recommend every organization take assessments every year. You can see the assessment that StarCIO does is around our 4 cornerstones of being smarter, faster, safer, and innovative. Those we think are the pillars of a transformative culture. And we think you need to assess this from what your expectations are for today. Maybe your businesses require remote work, maybe they require some application development, but also using an assessment to look at what your future looks like and whether you are staffed and skilled and have the right technologies in place to be able to execute your future roadmap. So number 1, always be assessing, particularly this time of year, about what your organization capabilities are. Number 2 is think about Agile as your cornerstone operating model. Again, it's not just about Scrum and application development teams. We've applied Agile in operations, in data science. We've worked at marketing and operating groups. We use it not only to be able to execute in the short term in terms of sprints and even releases, but using estimating to come up with roadmaps, coming up with ways to find standards. So you're not just building and throwing things into production, but actually building standards at the same time, how to keep teams happy through a very long journey of transformation and getting teams focused around releases. What you're seeing on the right-hand side, one of the things that I've been busy with is taking my book and putting it into workshops and taking those workshops and making them into courses. StarCIO now has 3 different courses around Agile planning and cultures, starting with a course just that anybody can take about becoming Agile, how to then become an Agile team member, and then a certification around StarCIO Agile planning. So that's number 2, make Agile your key area of focus. Then I think about data and analytics and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and how do you marry this with the need to invest in data operations and data governance. And so again, if you start with Agile, you can apply Agile to your data governance and analytics programs in terms of being able to iterate and listen to where your organizations require analytics, and then building in the right governance and policies and data integrations and data ops in parallel to that. What does that look like? Well, if you have a team doing self-service business intelligence in a particular area of the business, go ahead and put in the work to actually do the data debt and the data operations around it, and also doing the data governance around it. And so Agile provides a really good framework to marry both the data science side of the equation and the data governance side. This is my view and my opinion of where DevOps will be going over the next 4 years. I just published a post this morning around this, around DevOps 2021, and looking beyond the common practices into, how do you think about an employee experience? How do you move off of legacy architectures and put an Agile architecture in place, using QA as the anchor of change, going from just moving to the cloud to really being Agile with infrastructure and thinking about a multi-cloud architecture where it's required, and then going from beyond just a DevOps culture to a digital culture where organizations are collaborating not only in IT and Dev and Ops, but also with our business groups. So visit blogs.starcio.com and you're going to see that post today. And then lastly, and this is the hardest one, if you look back on my posts at this time of year, I'm really talking about how to really balance priorities, how to look at both innovation and operational excellence, how to look at both compliance and innovation, and really thinking through what is a meaningful number of priorities where the business can see impact from your deliveries, but your teams can execute well. I focused on this singularly early into the COVID exercise because I know IT organizations have multiples of priorities given their size. And it's one easy way to burn out people and one very easy way to overpromise and underdeliver if you have 500 people in IT and try to sign up for 200 initiatives. And I've seen that, and I've seen numbers like that. So thinking through what your priorities are, thinking through how do you deliver ROI on some of them, what are some of your long-term investments, and beyond just a digital operating model, what are the things in the office of the CIO that you have to invest in to be able to support the business over the next 4 years. So 5 areas of investment that I'd like you to think about over the next few years, and particularly next year as you reorganize given the opportunities and risks. As Jason knows, I share a ton of what I do publicly. I have almost 500 posts on my blog. I share also some new videos. I've been publishing 2 to 3 videos a month that are 5 minutes in length under starcio.com/5NYIke. And if you sign up for my newsletter under starcio.com/driving-digital, I share all my writing from the month in that newsletter that comes out monthly. And that's us over at StarCIO. If you need some help with your transformation program, or you just need somebody to talk to about your priorities, I'm here to help. Thanks, Jason, for this opportunity to speak to everybody and at the Canada IT Leaders Forum. And I think I'm ready for some questions.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much, Isaac. I'm just going to stop sharing your screen here. So just to Isaac's point very quickly, folks, he does post some excellent content and nice bite-sized chunks as well. So do connect with him, follow him on LinkedIn to get access to some of those. So thank you very much for the presentation. We do have a couple of questions that are coming from the audience. The first, the one that came in from Niels Isaac over at ATB, who just asked how, and obviously you covered a little bit of this, but how has COVID changed how companies are transforming and what is new? Is infonomics getting more focus?
Infonomics. I'm going to confess I have to know a little bit more about what that word means. I've heard it used in a couple of different ways, but I think COVID certainly made organizations think about employee experience well beyond remote working, and so I think some organizations were backpedaling just to make sure that people could work remotely. I think, they then went into making sure they had the right tools and the right access and the right performance. One area that I've seen take a significant jump up over the last 6 months is low-code platforms. There are a large number of them, but you think about all the applications that organizations had to build, from human safety to, how do you operate when coming back to work. It required building applications very quickly for workflows. And so a lot of people have been asking me about low-code platforms around this. Application development, in light of the fact that customers have different expectations now, is probably the second area I see a lot of. And downturns and slow turns are really good times to educate and create a learning organization. So if your organization feels like it's still learning how to process data, or how to use analytics, or how to set up data governance to address some of your data debt, or really looking at some of your legacy technologies and how to move them from a legacy into a modernization. These are all things that CIOs are talking to me about because they see the downturn as a time to focus and a time to clean up maybe some messes that would have been hard to do, and really turn it around and saying, the organization is ready to do things. We have people being able to work pretty well working remotely, and let's pick our battles and go after them.
Excellent, thank you very much. Mr. Claude Sanfo asked a question. Can you please just comment on how emerging technologies actually relate to that term digital transformation?
Say that again, how most technologies?
How emerging technologies relate to digital transformation.
Well, so let's again look at that digital lens, right? And so when you think about emerging technologies, there's a horizon to them that bigger companies with better budgets, with better skills, are going to be able to go after technologies when there's relatively little capabilities coming from the technology companies themselves. So if you wanted to go do large scale deep learning 3 or 4 years ago, you were investing in people who could go program TensorFlow by hand on a cloud environment, get data ready for it, and being able to scale it. And so what I track when I look at something like this is, I need skills, I need compute, I need capability, I need right alignment with my business on the right problems to work on. And these are hard for most mainstream enterprises to go invest in. What ends up happening over the course of years is technology companies come in with capabilities to simplify things. And so now you can find machine learning embedded in lots of platforms. You can find IoT platforms that have low code capabilities. There are more integration platforms for you to go look at than you have time to, right? And so that's that lens. When you think about emerging capabilities, there are things that technology companies, financial services companies, companies that are on the more, bleeding to leading edge that can do because they have the budgets and they have the skills to go after them, that today the average CIO needs to learn and understand, because in a year or two, the capabilities are going to come to market and be accessible. So that's how I think about it. You, Jason.
Yep, another question coming in here. What do you think the overall impact of all these challenges will have in the speed to develop and deploy new and changed systems?
Well, it depends. If your culture is smart, you're going to look at this time and say, again, trying to fit, 20 things, 200 things through a narrow funnel isn't going to work. I think the best thing organizations can do is to find the handful of things that truly matter and to align as many of the people in the organization against them. This is a time where you're not going to have as much detractors, right? People have enough stress in their lives just getting through their day. You're going to have more opportunity to introduce new capabilities and processes and technologies, and probably have a longer runway to being able to introduce the changes to your organization. So I think this is about the organization coming together and finding a few things that are meaningful, really partnering on iterative experiments to try things out, and using the time when people are more likely going to join the program than detract the program. And so doing fewer things better, I think, is the charter for 2021.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, that brings us right to the close of time. So thank you very much, Isaac. All the audience, so they can join me in a virtual round of applause for Isaac. Although we can't hear you, we can imagine that you're doing so.